variously pronounced Boudicca, 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 many different spellings. What I'm going with are the ones I found most common in the annals. She existed in the 1st century AD. Was a Celtic warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, and I'll show you a map here in just a moment. Historians think she lived circa approximately 25 AD. She died either 60, 61 AD. Historians vary on exactly when the greatest battles happened. Her name means victory. Some people feel that it is an early variant of the name Victoria. At any rate, Victoria's contemporaries felt that she was a namesake. The British actress Alex Kingston, you've probably seen her in TV shows and movies, in 2003. With that is one of the 2 Roman historians that most of my talk is coming from, and they're both 2nd century, and they're writing about her through the received tradition of the oral historians, all right? And Tacitus agrees that she's extremely intelligent. Now, how tall is very tall in the 1st century? Actually, some people could be quite tall. It is rumored that Mary, Queen of Scots, was 6 feet. Probably 5'6", 5'8", somewhere around there. Now, you have to understand, of course, that this is being written by a Roman. So she does look terrifying. Her glance is fierce and her voice harsh. All of the historians suggest that the hair was this tawny, reddish brown hair down to the hips. And the Celtics were great makers of jewelry, earrings. I wore my Celtic earrings today, and loved the great thick mantles and the brooches, etc. And Cassius tells us this was her invariable attire. Now, this is to get your bearings. What we today call Britain, okay, I didn't even have Ireland over here. This is 1st century Celtic Britain, all right? To get your bearings, this is what we today call Scotland, all right? This is where Braveheart lived. This is the wall, Hadrian's Wall. Like Braveheart, these folks fought back against the Romans, and the Romans were not able to subdue the Scots, the Picts, all right? So Hadrian in the 2nd century said he'd had it, and built the wall, which you can see if you travel in this area. And to get your bearings again, here is Edinburgh, where Edinburgh Castle is. Here's the Lake District. The Bronte sisters lived here, Jane Austen here, etc. Okay, just so you see where you are today, because back then, these were all Roman and Celtic, all right? Here are the Iceni people. Today, this is Norfolk and Suffolk, all right? The Romans have subjugated all of these tribes variously during BC time, but by 43 AD, the conquest is complete. They did good things as well. They built roads, they built villages, all right? But they also were involved in many depredations, rapes, pillaging, to conquer. Here's what happens. Iceni, these are Roman villages here. Colchester is the Roman capital. St. Albans and London, which is a Roman city founded by Rome. It is Londinium, and it is also a walled city. They had taken over all of these tribes and destroyed them. There were uneasy pieces existing between the Romans and the Celts. Boudicca's husband was Prasutagus. One way he decided he could get along with the Romans was to have an uneasy peace, including a will. He said, look, if you'll stop coming in and beating up on us, I will cede you half of the Iceni territory upon my death. But you have to understand that I want to take care of my family, so the other half goes to them. Now, the emperor is Nero, and I don't think I need to tell you anything more. When Prasutagus died, the Romans invaded the Iceni territory. And those of you who study war know that one of the instruments of war is to rape, pillage, burn down, humiliate the leaders, and this is what happened. The tribe had accepted Boudicca as their leader after Prasutagus' death, so that's who the Romans went after. They tied her to a post. Remember the scene from Braveheart where the woman is tied to the post, not beaten, but tied to the post, and then the rest? And then the scene from Mel Gibson's The Passion, where the Christ is flogged. This is what happened to her. It is an act of humiliation and, of course, terrible torture. She was probably flogged with a cat o' nine tails. And that would mean that the metal tips were literally ripping the skin and muscle from the bone of her back. They did this to a woman. They did this because she was the leader. And they did this in front of the tribe. It was excruciating. You see a whipping scene similar to that in the great movie Glory as well, right? But that wasn't the worst for her. They then dragged her daughters, guessing 12 to 14, probably virgins, out in front of her and the village. And remember, these are royals. And they repeatedly raped her daughters in front of her. They left, laughing, drunk, and her people took care of her. Now, this again is from Tacitus. We consider him reliable. After she recovered as best she could from the injuries on her back, her people took care of her. They accepted her as their leader. This woman said, never again. She got on her chariot, and I'll talk about that in just 1 minute, with her daughters in front of her, and she drove all through Iceni territory and then the adjacent Celtic territories, and she rallied all of the Celts. She said, no more. We're not going to let them do this to us again. See what happened to us? Do you want that to happen to you? In addition to everything else the Romans were doing, you probably already guessed, they also enslaved the British and sent them back to Rome to serve Romans. She said, do you want to be enslaved? She was very successful at rallying the Celtic tribes. Some historians estimate that it was 250,000. I think that's probably high, but many, many thousands joined this woman. Why do they follow a woman? It was not unusual among the Celts for a woman to be a warrior, to be a queen, and to be a leader. This woman had something else. She was deeply aggrieved, deeply hurt, and she had intelligence, as Tacitus teaches us, and she had presence, and she had that strength and that stature, and she had that leadership quality that's so difficult to define, but she did. In fact, as she and her troops began place by place by place going after the Romans, this village, because the Romans did settle in, all right, and intermarry and farm. No Roman was safe. And Nero started hearing about these invasions from one of the runners who got back to him, and believe it or not, and Tacitus tells us this, he was no fan of Nero, Nero thought about pulling out of Britain, which was the northernmost outpost of the British Empire. He didn't, they stayed for another 400 years, but he thought about it. She wasn't finished. Where was the governor, the Roman governor? He was over in Wales. He was still trying to finish off the conquering. He'd gone over to bitterly cold Wales. He was up in northern Wales, and his name was Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. He hears from another runner about what's happening back east. And so he starts heading back east to put down this rebellion, right? The 9th Legion of the Roman army. A legion is up to 6,000 of the finest soldiers in the world. One legion. They destroyed them. Boudicca and her men killed every one of them. So Suetonius sends to Rome, I need help. Nero is slow to send the troops. He's thinking about leaving, remember? So Boudicca and her people now leave their territory where they have finished off some of the Roman encampments, and they start heading, remember the map? You're going to move now southeast. They start heading southeast. They destroyed Colchester, they destroyed St. Albans, and they, believe it or not, burned London to the ground, destroyed it. 70 to 80,000 Roman soldiers Celtic soldiers and civilians died during these wars. The greatest one was called the Battle of Watling Street, north of London. Okay? Nobody was safe from Boudicca. It didn't matter if you were a soldier or a citizen. If you were Roman, you were going to die. She wanted Rome out of Britain. Now, some people might call her a terrorist. Other people call her a patriot who finally stood up to the Romans. What happened to her finally, we're pretty sure it was poisoning, but they differ, the historians differ. Did she kill herself? And the rumor is that the daughters also died of poisoning. Some people feel that they killed themselves because they had already been in captivity. They knew what was going to happen to them. Other people feel that very possibly there was a traitor that went over to the Romans, and Suetonius was able to give him some wine. Oh, take this in to your lady, and that might have been what happened. Either way, she was given a lavish funeral, according to reports, buried somewhere north of London. Archaeologists are so funny. They think they have found the Round Table twice now in Scotland. They think they have found her burial between, I don't know any other way to put this, between the 8th and 10th platforms of the London Tube. I don't know how they think that she's there, and I didn't see any bones as I did my research, but we know that she was buried somewhere around London, and she was given an honorable burial. The chariot is Celtic. Some of my students think, well, they must have stolen it off the Romans. In fact, this is Bronze Age on into Iron Age, okay? And the Celts were very fine craftsmen, and they were famous for their chariots. This is an open chariot. Possibly the word car comes from that word. You don't have heavy horses pulling a chariot. They would be light for maneuverability, right? Whereas you would have the heavy draft horses for the knights because of all that armor. These would be light and maneuverable. A couple little tidbits here. My students know I do lots of croutons. Possibly the Brits, we never say they drive on the wrong side. That's just, they think we do. But they possibly drive on the left because most people are right-handed, right? Your sword is in your right hand. If you're driving the chariot or you're on horseback, you're riding on the left. The other theory is that British and Australian and American roads are all a particular width because that is the width of a chariot and horses and soldiers running down, okay, those roads. It's a nice theory, it's a nice thought. Again, they were not backward at all. Okay, they were smelters, they were craftsmen, they were jewelry makers, they were chariot makers, and they had their own coinage. And this is in the British Museum, copy of a Nicenian coin. What happened? How come you haven't, most of you, heard of her? She was very famous in the Anglo-Saxon period, and Tacitus made her famous in Rome. And then my students know I refuse to call this the Dark Ages because these people were so brilliant in their poetry and their craftsmanship. However, with the Dark Ages dropping, she disappears from history. The chronicles don't include her at all. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles and the other chronicles of the Middle Ages do not include her at all. It's with the Renaissance brought back through the Crusades to England, Western world literature, which, thank you Arabs, had been preserved for us in the Library of Alexandria, Egypt. That's when not only do they rediscover, or discover for them the first time, the Greek playwrights and poets, etc., but also Tacitus. They were charmed. They were absolutely charmed by the story. She is mentioned in Spenser, Edmund Spenser, Cooper. Beaumont and Fletcher were contemporaries of Shakespeare. They wrote a Renaissance play about her. Tennyson wrote a poem about her. I'll show you in just one second, just a very quick look. She's been a popular subject since the Renaissance through the Victorians, the Romantics, and on into the moderns. Many TV shows, the Alex Kingston movie. Of course, you know there have been historical romances written about her, and one of the famous ones is by Rosemary Sutcliffe. Some of you may enjoy her novels, her historical novels. Lots of documentaries, clothing shops, and you can imagine what kind, it's goth clothing for the most part, and several ships have been named after Queen Boudicca. If you saw Game of Thrones, right, then you're not surprised by the wolf image associated with the royalty here. There is a statue in London, which I think is very ironic since she burned it to the ground. But King Alfred was taken with her story, and also that his wife may be her namesake. Now, he died way too young, but he did commission this statue. He never got to see it, and neither did Victoria. The dates are either 1902 or 1905 when it was finished. I went with '02 because I saw that the most. Prince Albert commissioned it. Thornycroft built it. It's humongous, and it is on the Thames embankment, now guarding the city that she had burned down. You may be familiar with this movie, The Last Centurion. You look familiar? That's Boudicca. Now, she is not the star of the movie, but she is one of the major persona in this movie. The blue Pictish paint on her face, the auburn hair, okay? And in this movie, she is extremely vicious. No Roman's going to get by. She will hunt you down if you're Roman. She doesn't have a whole army behind her. She's on her own doing this. And this movie suggests that she has occult powers as well, that she's sort of witchy. Okay, Lord Tennyson, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Boudicca, okay, and we don't have time to read all of this, but I wanted to remind you that though this was a wife and a mother who loved her family and loved her people, what happened to her turned her into a warrior. And when you are a warrior trying to get the oppressor out of your land, you stop at nothing. And so Tennyson includes exactly what will happen to anybody that is in her path, and it's quite graphic. Finally, Tacitus, Book 14, Chapter 35, wanted you to see how she was able to do this by the force of her personality, but she also told her people, if you don't, then you will be cowards. If I can do this, then you certainly can. And so she says, look round and view your numbers. Behold the proud display of warlike spirits, and consider the motives for which we draw the avenging sword. On this spot, she sounds very much like Elizabeth I, facing the Spanish Armada. Give me my sword. Where's my horse? I'm not a queen today, I'm a warrior. Or Joan of Arc, or Henry V. On this spot, we must either conquer or die with glory. There is no alternative. Though a woman, my resolution is fixed. And here's the challenge to the men. The men, if they please, may survive with infamy and live in bondage. You're not going to fail to follow a woman like this and live in infamy and slavery. You're going to follow her, which they did. And I hope now, she said at the beginning of this clip, you know me, and I hope now that you do. Thank you very much.